Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Roker Report podcast in association with the Sunderland Community Soup Kitchen. It's Gav and he joins for a Q&A pod midweek as there's a lot to cover off and we wanted to get your questions on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, on all things Sunderland. We said ask us anything and that's exactly what you've done, although I have left out a handful of questions, silly ones. We don't want the silly ones. This is a very serious podcast. We've got lots of really interesting things to talk about when it comes to Sunderland. Joining me, it's a three-man pod tonight. Joining me, first and foremost, Martin. Hey, mate.
Hello, Gav. Yeah, nice to be back and looking forward to getting stuck into a few of the big talking points because, yeah, as you say, there's a lot to go through at the moment, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely. And also with us is Chris. Hey, mate.
You all right? Look at you two, looking all smug because you were able to talk about a win at the weekend. I don't know how long it's been since I've been able to do that.
Yeah, you're banned until we lose again.
Bastard.
So, yes, like I said, we've got tons of questions. And if I'm honest, if we answer every single one of them, it's going to be a long podcast. I think it's going to be long anyways, but there is quite a lot to talk about. What is interesting to me, by the way, and I mentioned this to you too just before we came on the air, but we had very few questions about Michael Beale, which, given we won at the weekend, is interesting because I think if we'd done this a week ago, it might have been a different type of podcast. So I think the tone of this one might be a little bit different than it might have been had we recorded this a week ago or so. But there's quite a lot going on. As we said, we record this a couple of days out from the end of the transfer window, for instance, and we all know that a lot's going to change in terms of players coming in, players coming out in the time that maybe between the time we record this and it goes out. I don't know. Things move at such a fast pace. But people are bombing us with questions and we'll get started with transfers, I think, because transfers are this time of the year the most important thing to most people. It's been a dead window, really. Let's be honest, we haven't really done anything, but I think that's more reflective of the picture as a whole. The Premier League, nobody's really signing anybody, which then has a trickle-down effect. In the likes of us in the Championship, we've got to wait for things to move elsewhere before we can sign players we want. So that is kind of the theme of the questions. The first one from the off, and I'll come to you on this, Chris, from D Taylor 1879 on Instagram. They ask, why are we always slow in the transfer window? Are we always slow in the transfer window?
No, I think everyone's exactly the same. I think January is a collective thing. I think every football league club goes through the same kind of pain in January. I don't think we're really any different to too many clubs. There's always one or two, and it's always the problem, isn't it? There's always one or two clubs who get some business done early, and then all of the fans of the other clubs think that that's what they have to do. But it doesn't work like that. We've talked for a few years now, every January when it comes to this, that in this transfer window, because it's the middle of the season, most moves are no-brainers where players haven't been getting a game or they've been unhappy or something's happened, like we'll come on to the Pritchard scenario. So there's those no-brainers, but otherwise it's always the domino effect, isn't it? And it normally comes from the top. So sometimes, when a big move happens in the Premier League, some fans in the Championship, League One and all that might not think too much of it, but that might free up some loan moves further down, which then triggers other moves, people going out, and kind of cascades all the way down the leagues. Even if there's like a really big move at the top, it means a couple of young players can then go out on loan and they go to the Championship and the Championship clubs loan to League One and so on, and it goes like that. So it's kind of waiting for those moves to happen, but it tends to happen late on because people panic. And the January window is all about panic, whereas the summer one is about planning, even kind of years ahead. When are these players going to break through and all this sort of stuff? But January's just reacting to, either trying to get yourself up the table because you're in a bit of bother, or trying to lift yourself from that mid-table position up to the top, or consolidate yourself at the top. So it's just a strange window, and even years later since it was introduced, I still don't think people have quite got the hang of it.
And the other thing I would say to that is that with football now in general, it's more of a business. More clubs are being run like businesses, and taking out the emotion out of it and all the rest of it. If you've got an asset and you're selling it, you want as much money as you can possibly get. It's a business transaction. Likewise, if you're a club buying a player, you're investing money into something which you may eventually want to see a return on, whether that be financial, like what we do, where we go out and we sign players with the aim to develop them and then potentially sell them on, or if it's just a case of we need to sign X player for X amount because that player will get us promoted or will save us from relegation, then clubs will do that. It's very much done in business terms. So that's perhaps why it goes on as long as it does, because everybody's trying to get the best value for whatever it is that they're trying to bring into the club. And speaking of players coming into clubs, Martin, I'll come to you on Amad, because we've had a few on Amad. Niall, at SAFC Niall on Twitter, he said, thoughts on the Amad situation? I think Ten Hag is a dick for keeping him and then putting out a full-strength squad against Newport and not bringing him on from the bench. Also, Jace Nunn on Instagram, he said, would signing Amad hinder us? Are you blocking the progress of our own players? Amad, do you think, one, Martin, we might actually have a chance of getting him, but also, what's your overall assessment of sort of the way he's been used since the summer at Manchester United? I mean, I know he's been injured, but recently he's been available, and it looks like maybe Ten Hag's not sold on him. So really, they should just give him to Sunderland, I think. I think they should just give him for free.
For free.
Pay him up, give him to us for now. I think that's the best thing for everyone, isn't it?
Well, I'd be very happy with that. I think it's a funny one with Amad, because like he was a sensational player for a lot of the time he was with us. He obviously took a little bit of a time to sort of kick on and get going, didn't he? But once he hit his stride last season, he was superb. I'm actually not that keen on coming back, I have to say, which is probably a controversial opinion. But if he came back permanently, if we could get him signed on a 5-year deal, brilliant. If he comes back now, but it's right, because like if he comes back now, yeah, he might score a few goals, he might get us a little bit higher up the table. I don't think he's going to be the difference between promotion or not, because I kind of think that, I don't know, I'm not that confident on that at all this season. I just think we're better off investing in permanent. Like, I don't like loan players anyway at the best of times, and I'd prefer, you've seen Bar play on Saturday. I know that's only a short thing, but Bar's performance on Saturday was great, showed real promise. And I think if you bring Amad in, whereas he's going to play in that position, isn't he? Bar's going to come out the team, and we're kind of preventing our own players from progressing. Now, if we could get Amad on a permanent deal, which I think's usually unlikely unless we're in the Premier League, then that's different. But I feel sorry for him at Man United, because I think he's more than capable of playing in that team. And I think some of the players that you see playing ahead of him in the minute aren't as good as him, but obviously he has been injured. But I wouldn't be that in favour of him coming back on loan, I have to say.
Chris, your face sort of changed direction there when Martin said that. But to be honest, I kind of understand and agree in a way with Martin. Like, I do generally think with loan players that what you are doing, really, they're taking up space for somebody who you own, who we talked about investment before, so investing time and energy into a player. But Amad's a special player. It's like, I'd find it very hard to turn him down if the opportunity was on the table. And what interests us is, how likely is it, one, and how much does he want to come? Because for me, if he's available on loan, there has to be 5 or 6 teams at least in the Premier League who would love him. And that puts them ahead of us in the pecking order. It's going to be an interesting last few days, I think. I think it's inevitable that this isn't going away until that deadline shut. Whether he comes or not, I think is unlikely, but still, I think if the opportunity's there, we've got to take him, surely.
Oh, look, the whole Amad thing is going to go on for years and years and years. It's going to be the Jordan Henderson thing, people might say he's always going to end up back at Sunderland at some point. The lad will be 33 and people will be saying, he's going to have a swan song at Sunderland at some point, and it's going to go on for the rest of his career. I mean, it was interesting because, listening to Martin say that, I mean, I don't completely disagree, but the whole thing about loan deals is, it all depends, because I mean we all think about loan signings going back, and starting with Amad, that lifted that team last season, and it's amazing when you think that was 7th and basically just outside the playoffs on goal difference now without him, because he was so good. And I think we've got rose tinted specs as well, because he did have a lot of off days, and I think Martin, you were talking about his Man United, getting into that team. I think he's still got a way to go to be a Manchester United,
regular,
even
yes.
kind of like even a match day squad regular. I think at the minute, because he had his amazing days and he did some incredible things. But I think for a club like Man United, they want a bit more consistency than probably he gave us last season. But
the only thing I would say to that, Chris, is you watch them. Jesus. I think he could do a job for them.
But you say,
but obviously we don't see training every day.
It's a different level, though, isn't it?
It is a different level.
That's it. But on the loan deals, I always think, well, how much do you actually need them, or do you just want someone who's better than what you've got? And I look at our fullback position at the minute, and we're talking about signing this lad from Leeds. I would have actually thought that if the club were planning and the likes of, the long-term injuries would eventually come back and get fit, then actually that would be a perfect solution to have a loan signing until the end of the season to see us through in that position. And then in the summer, review where are these lads going to come back fully fit, where we're going to be for the start of the season, and then sign someone. So in that instance, I know what you mean, Martin, about loan signings. I prefer us to sign permanent, but in situations like that, I think, well, look ahead, get the young lads back fit, and loan someone just to kind of fill a gap until the summer and they come back.
Oh, I completely agree with that sort of approach to it. But I think if we brought in Amad or somebody of a similar level who's a step above pretty much everything else that we've got, it actually changes the whole complexion of the team, doesn't it? And we saw last year, we wouldn't have gotten the playoffs without Amad. He got us into the playoffs, and then you create all of this other expectation. For next season, I think it kind of you elevate where you're not ready to go to.
It does. You're right. But on the other hand, you could argue that we've got a really young squad. Now, if we bring in a player like Amad, like we did last season, or someone who's a level above what we've got, there's a double-edged sword, because on one hand, you can say, well, okay, well, someone somewhere isn't going to get as many games and minutes on the pitch who you probably want to develop. But on the other hand, having him play with Amad or someone who is that level above for even a handful of games, does that bring that player on a bit more as well? Like playing with those players,
quite possibly,
even on the training pitch?
I think you saw last season where we had Amad and Roberts linking up so well on that sort of right-hand side, often sometimes to the detriment of Jack Clarke's performances. Jack Clarke's been a sensational player for us this season. I think it's because Amad's not been in the team. We've had to go through Clarke a lot more. Roberts' effectiveness has been diluted with Amad not being there. So it's almost like you're kicking the problem down the hill 6 months. And I think we haven't quite solved it yet. And, maybe Bar's performances over recent weeks go some way at solving that. But I would rather now we were building an 11 or 15, 18 players to really tackle the championship and go up next season. And I think if we bring Amad in, unless we can get him on an 18-month loan, then I think that's a completely different scenario. But if we're just getting him in on loan for the rest of the season, I think we're just kind of kicking the problem down the hill and we're not setting ourselves up right for next season.
Well, I was just trying to work out how much that permanent deal you were talking about on a 5-year contract was going to cost us.
Oh,
now that would be nice.
I'm sure we can find a few pennies in the back of Kyril's pocket there to sign him. But maybe not. Maybe when we get promoted, yeah.
We'll sell Clarke for 30 and offer Man United like a couple of million. See what they say.
Yeah, that'll do. We've had a couple more questions around transfers. I'll put these two together because they're pretty much the same. James _123 on Instagram has said, "Who is the one person we need in the squad? Or one position we need filled." Joe Lewins on Twitter has said, "Which position do you think is the one we must strengthen in this window? I believe a dominant central defensive midfielder is a must, more so than a striker. What are your views?" I'll come to you, Chris, on this one.
Well, I mean, the first one, who is the person we need in the squad? I mean, I think that's a pointless question when it comes to our recruitment, because
I don't know who half them.
Well, exactly. Like over the last 3 years, there's suddenly been someone announced, and I've just went, who are they? Never heard of them most of the time. So you're talking, I mean, we could reel off 10 names now between the three of us, and we won't go anywhere near them, because that's not the market we're looking in, because we only know the obvious players. We don't watch all the academies week in, week out, like we've got scouts out there watching, and the Dewey deal coming in from Costa Rica and all that sort of stuff coming in from left field. I mean, how are we supposed to know the one person? I mean, we could say what type of player and position, like the next question, because the dominant central midfield player, I mean, it's clear that, I mean, I said this in the summer, that was the kind of place that I thought we were weak, because we didn't know what the strikers were going to be like at that point. So it seemed like we strengthened, bringing in kind of 4 players in that position. You thought, well, at least we've got half a chance of one of them sticking some goals in the back of the net. Hasn't quite turned out like that. But this central defensive midfielder, it's a strange one because we desperately need somebody to kind of shore up and make sure we've got cover in that position at least. But I mean, you want Dan Neil in there every week. I mean, he's just one of the best central midfield players in the division. And Ekwa is only he played a handful of games towards the end of last season, and this is essentially his first full season. And taking that into account, although he's a bit older than he should be at this stage doing that, like you can see his form's going up and down, which, you expect that from someone in his first full season, playing week in, week out. And the question mark is in the squad, how much does the club rate Jay Matete? And that's the question. Like, if the club have given up on him, then they need a body in there. But then where do they pitch that? Do they say, right, we're going to go out and go big and get someone who's just he's going to be one of the best midfield players in the division? Or do they get someone else who they think has got a good chance and sit in behind Dan Neil and Ekra as more cover, and then Matete makes him move to Plymouth or wherever, or wherever, whoever fancies him? But that's going to be the question mark, because does the club consider Jay Matete as cover for these two? And I think the club are going to do something with Ekwa in the same way as what they did with Dan Neil, where he's making a few mistakes, his form's coming in and out, but they're just going to keep playing him because that's how he's going to develop, and that's how he's going to become a better player. And it worked with Dan Neil last season when he had weeks and weeks of making mistakes, getting red cards and giving the ball away for, I remember at Sheffield United and all this sort of stuff. And I just think with Ekwa, they know there's a cracking player there, and they want as many minutes on the pitch as possible. So it's a tough one because, I mean, the Mvili thing, I mean, why? I don't really get that, because he'd expect to play, and then you're losing minutes for Ekwa and you're losing minutes for Dan Neil. And, well, Dan Neil's not going to be pulled out. It's going to be Ekwa. So that's the big question mark. It's where do they pitch that signing? Do they trust Jay Matete? Does Jay Matete want to leave in the next couple of days? So, it's a tough one. It's not an obvious one just to bring a top draw central midfielder in, because you've got two players in there who you want to play.
The only thing I would add to that really is that I think if we're going to bring anybody in that position, it has to be somebody experienced, and whether that kind of experienced player is actually available at the minute, that would add what we need them to do. Like, I know for most of the window we've had Jan and Via linked, and I don't actually think the club are that interested. I think they've kind of poured cold water on that one. But I could see that kind of signing working, just because it would maybe be a short-term deal, bit of experience just for those lads to learn off, maybe in games where we need a little bit more experience to help manage the games and things like that. I could see that working out. I do think we need a centre-mid. I think Matete, if he stays, it's because he's injured at the minute. I don't know how bad his injury actually is, but I think he'll not struggle to get a club in League One. And I personally don't think they're that keen on him, otherwise we would have seen more of him. Martin, do you want to just come in on that?
I've got probably a slightly different take on that sort of midfield conundrum, if you like, because I think we saw on Saturday how we're going to move forward with our sort of midfield structure, which is one midfielder sitting and two playing ahead of him. And we saw Dan Neil sitting there on Saturday, and we've seen Ekwa tried there, haven't we, in sort of in front of the back four in a more defensive role. And I actually don't think Neil or Ekwa are naturally that defensive midfield player. I think they're more comfortable, and we get more out of them by those two playing a little bit further forward. Obviously, you've got Bellingham to throw into there as well, but Bellingham falls kind of into that same category, I think, as Ekwa does, where we want to give him game time, we want to give him exposure. They're going to make mistakes, they're going to have some weeks of sort of off form that you need to play through. But I think if we could bring in a sort of specialist defensive midfield player who could sit in that deeper position, who's a bit more experienced than what we've got, I think that would give us a really nice balance, and would enable almost Ekwa and Bellingham to an extent to rotate a little bit, give them a little bit of time out the team when we need to. And I think if we did that, you've got that, just have Nous in front of the back four who can really lead the team. And I suspect if we are going to make a signing in midfield, it's going to be somebody of that ilk who'll be a specialist defensive midfield player rather than another player like Neil or like Ekwa who prefers playing further forward.
One last question on transfers. I think this is a good one to end off on, given he's the only kind of player who's gone out the window as we record this. Jack Asbury on Facebook has said, do you think the club is right to send Jewison Bennett on loan to a club in Greece? Personally think we should have kept him around, but if he wants to go on loan somewhere, going somewhere else in England would probably have been better for him long term. Martin, I'll just come to you quickly on that one. Bennett, should we have kept him around, and is a loan to a Greek club the best thing for him?
We should have kept him around if we're going to use him, but we haven't seen hiding the hair of him since the Southampton game, I think, have we? Where he did a triple Maradona spin and put the cross in.
Just for the under-21s, I think, is the only place we've seen him.
So I think he's been criminally underused this season. I really like him. I think he's got a lot of talent. He can score a goal. And I actually don't understand why we haven't seen him more. Like Mowbray obviously didn't fancy him, did he? The fact he's gone on loan, or he's going on loan to a club in Greece, suggests that we don't really see a long-term future for him here. I think if we did, he would have gone to a League One club or another club in the Championship, because I think getting experience and minutes in English football is going to serve him better in terms of how he progresses than going off and playing some football in Greece, where we don't know what the standards. Obviously, the club will have a better idea of what the standards like, but it's a completely different sort of level of football. So I think it's a shame. I really like him. I think he's got a goal in him. We've seen he's got a goal in him. He's obviously got talent, but he's probably got the most difficult job at the club at present, hasn't he? Being a left winger when you've got Jack Clarke ahead of you. So a loan deal makes sense, but I would have preferred to see him go somewhere in this country than elsewhere.
The only thing I would add on that is, I think Michael Beale was asked about it, wasn't it? And he said, I'm expecting him back in pre-season. We see him as a part of the squad going forward, and I like what I've seen from him in training, but he's got to think about his international future, and he needs to be playing games with tournaments coming up and all these other things, which I totally get. But the report, what I saw, was that he turned down moves from Hibs. Stoke was another club mentioned, I think.
Yeah, it was strange.
And perhaps another team abroad. I can't remember who it was, but I can totally understand him wanting to go out and get minutes somewhere. He's not going to get them here, as you've said. It's quite clear, the player ahead of him in his position is our best player, and then for whatever reason they've not really used him, and there are reasons for that. And I mentioned on a podcast the other week that I'd heard a story about him, that game when we had a full team of first teamers out in the 21s, and he kicked off because he wasn't starting, and they ended up taking him off the bench, and he left in a huff. So there's been that side of it. I think he's clearly very frustrated from not playing, and I get that, to be fair, because when you're 16, 17-year-old making your international debut and then playing at a World Cup, to then not even get off the bench for your club team must be very frustrating. It's a bit different to some of the other lads who around his age who are maybe just waiting for that first opportunity. So I get it, but I'm a bit sceptical about sending him to Greece, if I'm honest. All we can hope for is that he's going to go out there, maybe enjoy the better weather, which is a bit more like being back at home, and maybe enjoying his football. And then in let's say he goes there and absolutely smashes it, he'll come back in pre-season, his stock will have risen, and there is that possibility that we don't have Jack Clarke in the summer. He could be gone by the end of the season, the way things are going, and there might be opportunities there for Dewey to get into the team. I don't know, but it's an interesting one anyways. And talking about players who've probably got moves away, or as we record, it looks like it's very likely that Alex Pritchard is off, Chris, and going to Birmingham, I think, of all clubs. We've had a few questions on Pritchard because this one's really split the fan base. A lot of people aren't particularly happy with the way the club have handled it, and then on the other side you've got people looking at it and saying, well, his long-term future was never going to be with Sunderland, and bar a smattering of games this season, really he hasn't done much in the Championship for Sunderland, and perhaps it's the best time to let him leave. There's definitely been a split, and like I say, we've had a lot of questions on it. First one we've got, Stuart Scott on Facebook has asked, so Pritchard's going to Birmingham, fair enough, wanted by current manager. Does that mean somebody else was picking the team under Tony Mowbray and now under Beale? I mean, is there anything weird in this, in that Pritchard really didn't get much of a kick under Mowbray at Sunderland, and then he's going to Birmingham and Mowbray's signing him and giving him a pay rise apparently and a big contract? Is there anything we can read into that?
Well, other than he's a fella who is going to need employment, basically. I mean, that's essentially what it comes down to. I mean, there's nothing more to it, that, he's getting to that age. He's what, 29, 30 now? I think has he hit 30 yet?
I think he's coming up 31. I think he's coming
31.
up 31.
There you go. So he's only got a couple, and he's not the most kind of dynamic, kind of physical, athletic type of player, is he? So he's probably got a couple of years left in him at this sort of level. He's probably got one more payday in him, one more contract at the kind of championship level. And we've got players coming through. We've got plans for the summer, so we offer him a year, and he looks around. His agent talks, and he can get a 2-year somewhere else, and more money. And he says, right, well, can I move now? Basically, I'm away. And yeah, okay, there's probably better ways to do it than down in tools and all this sort of stuff. But it's a tool that players have got to force moves, and that's what he's doing. And look, I mean, I can't blame him. People, these are people, and they've got families, and they've got the next few years to think about, and all this sort of stuff. And yeah, I mean, like I said, there's maybe better ways to do it, but I just feel it's that. And a move to Birmingham, I think at this stage in his career is and if they're offering a 2-year contract, 2.5-year contract, more money, then fair play to him. I actually think he's a good player. He's decent. He's not a world beater. He had some stinkers last season. He was up and down. His form was up and down last season. When he got in, sometimes he looked great. And then he would come on a sub and look great, and then he'd start a game, and then he'd be crap. So then he'd get dropped, and then he'd come back on a sub, and everyone think he was great again. And that was kind of the story of Pritchard last season. And he's had, I think he's actually been in better form this season, but I still don't think he's worth a long contract with where we're going and the type of players we're bringing in. So yeah, I just think it's a no-brainer all round. And he's not one of our best players that I'm really going to be absolutely gutted to see leave. And I think we'll bring in better players. So I've got no problem with it, really.
Jimbo Crimps on Twitter, Martin, has said, do you think we are better off without Pritchard long term?
Oh, look, no, I like Pritchard, and I think it's a shame that it's kind of ended like this. I think, we spoke after the Preston game, after he scored that goal, and I said, I'd be very happy for him to be offered another year, because I think he's a good player to keep around the squad. And I think, as Chris said, his impact off the bench has usually been better than what he's produced from the start. I just think it's kind of a shame how it's ended. You've seen over the past few weeks, he's been arguing on the pitch with players. He's been arguing with Beale, or seems to be arguing with Beale, visibly on the pitch, and it's obviously seemed to have snowballed a little bit. And I think he's been a good player for us. He came in when we were in League One, helped us get promoted. I can understand him wanting to protect himself to some extent. If he's got this contract offer on the table from Birmingham, or there was a club in Turkey also mentioned, wasn't there? And, he'll be thinking, well, I'm out of contract here in the summer. If I get injured today, that's going to be those moves off. So I can kind of understand it from that perspective. I think there's probably better ways of going about it.
Yeah. And
obviously we've only heard one side of the story. So, the club have sort of got in front of that story and tried to dictate how that story is perceived. And, the truth's often somewhere in the middle, isn't it? So we'll see what comes out over the next few weeks. But look, it's a shame to see him go. I think it's interesting that Mowbray is the one who's signing him, seeing as he didn't actually play him that much. So that kind of might start the rumours of somebody else picking the team rather than Tony Mowbray, and being told who to pick, which I don't see any...
That's kind of what Stuart got at with that first question, didn't he? Is somebody else perhaps picking the team as Mowbray?
I just don't see that at all. But it'll be interesting to see how Mowbray uses him at Birmingham, if that's where he is going, which it looks like he is.
Yeah, but I read that a couple of Birmingham fans saying that they don't have a player in that position. So, maybe it's just the right move for everybody.
Well, do they fancy taking Bradley Dack as well? I mean, they could have 2 for 1 if they
buy one, get one free.
Yeah. But no, I mean, in terms of that kind of people picking the team and all this sort of stuff, it's just because he had a different squad. It's just as simple as that. He's gone to Birmingham, and there's a player like Pritchard possibly available, and it works better at Birmingham than it might have done at Sunderland, and he's going to probably play more minutes just because of the squad he's got. It's just as simple as that. I don't think there's any kind of major kind of Kennedy type conspiracy. You know, there's no grassy knoll or anything like that.
I think what it is there's clearly more of an emphasis on whoever the head coach is to play the players we've got who have got a long-term future here, whether that's Job or a Bar or whoever it is. Like, we've invested money into these players. They're young, they need experience. So you let's say you play Alex Pritchard 35, 40 games a season, starting them. That's 35 or 40 games in their view that we could have been using somebody else. And I get the argument around, because I mentioned it before, we do need experience on the pitch. But to me, with Pritchard, right, I like him. But I think Chris was right there when he said, like, more often than not with Pritchard, we've seen over particularly the last couple of seasons, when he's been dropped, he's almost became a little bit better as a result in everybody's eyes. And then he comes off the bench, and like, it's been times this season when he couldn't get on the pitch for whatever reason that was, and we can only speculate. But then he would come on and he would change the game. And then you would be like, oh, well, I want to see Pritchard in the team the next week. Yeah. But then to me, the last 2 games he played, I don't think he played very well. I thought he was really poor against Hull, where he wasted pretty much every set-piece opportunity we had. Yeah. Couldn't beat the first man. And this isn't a new gripe. These issues have been there with Pritchard virtually throughout his time here. And to me, if what Nick Barnes put on Twitter was true, when Nick had said that Pritchard was the one pushing for a move in the summer, but there was no takers. So the club had signed players to replace him, who I presume would be Dak necessarily, just for the profile. And then Pritchard never then left. And then they've kind of been in a position in recent weeks where, sort of coming off the bench, he's made an impact, and they've been sort of forced in a way to play him because he has made a difference off the bench. But long term, I'm looking at it and going, what is the best thing for this team? Not just now, but a year from now. Because on this pod, we've talked a lot over the last couple of years. I remember, I've said this a few times, the 3 of us talking after games, doing podcasts and going, bloody hell, I just don't get it with Dan Neil. I'm not sure. I just don't get it. Lo and behold, 18 months later, you look at him now, and he's the best midfielder in the team. He's the best, one of the best in the league. And sometimes with young players, it's that longer term view on things, like with Job, for instance, or Bar. Like, there's something there, but they only get where we need them to get to if they play games and they make their mistakes. And same as what was said about Ekwa before. And players like Pritchard, yes, he's a good player, but is he so good that we have to give him a 2.5-year deal and a wage bump and play him every week? I would say no, Chris, to be honest.
Well, you keep, sorry, just to go at this Dan Neil thing, you always keep bringing up this Royal We business about, talking about Dan. I can never remember saying that about Dan Neil, but
I said that.
I'll take your word for that one. But just 2 things quickly. The Pritchard talking about him, starting 30, 40 games, which you mentioned that scenario there. You could see after an hour he was done. And the amount of times he got pulled off when he actually started a game, and he hardly ever lasted 90 minutes. He's not a 90 minutes player really. But the other thing was the statement, and just quickly on that, because a few people knocked that, but I don't really know what surely when there's something like that and a player is clearly going to be missing from the team sheet, the best thing for the club is to stick it out there and say, this has happened, this is why he's not in the squad, because otherwise, the rumours are just going to go around. The club might as well squash it with a quick statement. But I don't get people bashing the club on that.
Well, a lot of people had a problem with the timing of it. Like, could it have been put out the night before or the morning of the game rather than an hour before? But I think someone mentioned it right at the start of this topic. We've only had one side of the story, and it'll all come out eventually. Because when Pritchard does move, it'll be one of the first things he's asked about.
Final thing on Pritchard. The other player that we haven't mentioned in all of this is Aushish, which I think is the one who they see long-term potential in. Yeah. And I think he can go to the top, given the right development. Pritchard's 31. He's had to drop into League One in the prime of his career to get a club and get a game. So you're wanting players now who we can build, next season. I think they'll be looking further up the table and going, right, we want to target that top 4 and really get there. We need the players to build with us and go up. And Pritchard at 32, 33, if he's never been a Premier League player regularly on a 3 or 4 seasons basis, when he was 25, 26, 27, he's never going to be a Premier League player regularly when he's 32, 33. So we're kind of building that progression. Yes, look, you've got to get players who can help you get there. But as Chris said, he rarely finished. Yeah, he started 9 games a season, and he's only finished 2 of them. Like, that's not a player who's playing regularly and contributing and is integral to the side. So, as I say, I think it's a shame because he can pull those bits of magic out of the bag, can't he? But his career suggests he's never been able to do that on a regular basis, and he's not going to start now.
And Martin, you're spot on with O'Sheesh, but I'd throw Chris Rigg at you as well.
No, well, that's exactly. And the more that you put Pritchard even on the bench, he's blocking those players coming through and getting that experience. And we've only seen Rigg come back on the bench in the last few weeks, haven't we? Yeah. So I think I can understand it.
And when you think about the last game, if let's just theoretically, let's say none of this went on with Pritchard and he started, which he probably would have had there not been all this hell on, Barr probably wouldn't have started the game, and he got 2 assists and a goal. Rigg came off the bench, which probably wouldn't have happened. So this is the point I'm trying to make. As much as I think he's a good player, I would rather see us invest time in those players long term and short term. We've had a couple of other questions around Pritchard. I mean, we got an email from John Briggs who just wanted to bring up the subject of his character and his attitude, because there has been quite a lot of comments from Huddersfield fans saying, "We told you so. We told you he was a bit like this," in terms of the way he's kind of down tools. And they did, to be fair. I don't think it's the same circumstances, but when he was at Huddersfield, he basically done nothing. They look at him like he's Jack Rodwell, which is not the case here, but there has been quite a bit of that. And John was, right to maybe bring that up and just point out there have been questions about his character at other clubs, and we have overlooked it because he's been largely really professional at Sunderland. Thanks also to @FragPit on Insta and Gary Deary on Facebook, both asked questions about Pritchard. Hopefully we covered those off. We'll move on because we've got quite a lot to get through. Head coach Michael Beale. Like I said before, we didn't get a lot of questions about Beale, and it was only when I prompted people that we got a few, which is interesting given how viscerally the BealeOut campaign seemed to ramp up this time last week, really. Everybody really wanting rid of him, and then we get a win, and it's definitely calmed down a bit, although there will be people who are still on side with him. David Johnson on Facebook has said, "Does the BealeOut brigade just dislike the man, or is there a genuine reason for them not wanting him, Chris?"
I mean, that's a perfect question, and I'd like to know it myself. I want to know the answer because, sacking a manager when he's done really nothing to warrant even that conversation happening is I'm a bit lost with this kind of opening period of Mike Beale and the reaction to him. I really am. I mean, like I said, he wasn't at the top of my list. He wouldn't have been probably on my list because I wouldn't have thought of him. But he's here, and all he's done, pretty much. All right, you can pull apart, the real detail. It's in there, but all he's done, it's really been a continuation of the form that happened before him and was in Mowbray's. I think it was 2 wins in 9 games before Mowbray left. And then we won those 2 in between, and then lost to Bristol City. And then since then, it's really been a bit of a continuation of that. And you can see little things, how he's trying to change things, and it's some things are coming off, some things aren't. But it's not been a drastic drop off at all. I mean, I think when Mowbray left, we were 9th. I mean, we're 7th. I don't know. It's just, nothing. I mean, the football in some games has been, it's been ponderous and all this sort of stuff. And maybe people were expecting that honeymoon period and a big reaction from the players. But, still, if we're talking about a continuation in a head coach and that he slowly changes directions of things here and there, then using kind of this model and changing the head coach out and the coaching team staying the same, you're probably not going to see a big change because it's not an overhaul of the coaching behind the scenes. It's just, Michael Beale, changing the odd things on a match day and maybe the way he motivates players and his man management style, which surely can't have kicked in too much yet when you're talking about 5 weeks, 6 weeks tops. So look, I don't get it. I don't get the BealeOut brigade as it's been described in this question. I mean, he's a new manager. He's learning his squad. He's getting to know what works, what doesn't. He's trying to change things as we're trying to fight for a playoff place, which in itself, I think, is an achievement this season. Like I've said in the past, I think it's a tougher league. But yeah, so I mean, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that. I think a lot of people just really don't like his character. They don't like the way he's talked. Me and you talked about that, like that his character, the way he talks. I'd prefer a Roy Keane, a Dennis Smith, a Mick McCarthy, a Peter Reid, who wears his heart on his sleeve and he comes out. And I mean, I think that works better with Sunderland, but that's no reason not to like someone or want a guy to be sacked. Yeah, as you can probably tell, I don't really understand it. And as far as I'm concerned, you see where this goes, and let's have a look at the end of the season, which I've said quite a few times.
Yeah, well, this next game's going to be a biggie, isn't it, Martin? And we've had a couple of questions about that. Rob at RobXXIII on Twitter has said, will wins against Borough and Plymouth get fans on side with Beale? And on the other side of it, we've had a question from Chris Hodgkinson at SGHGJH on Twitter. He said, if Borough beat us, do you think we'll be back to BealeOut?
I'm sure some people are still BealeOut regardless of the results, really. And I'm with Chris, and you and I have spoken about it recently, Gav. I just don't understand it, whether it's a Rangers Celtic thing, whether people are also supporting Scottish clubs and have more of an impression of him from his time at Rangers, or what. I don't know, but it's just bizarre, quite frankly, to me. I'm sure there will be more BealeOut hashtags appear on social media if we get beat off Borough. I do think if we win against Borough and Plymouth, they'll be an awful lot quieter. I'm sure there'll be some people who he never wins over, but we saw on Saturday just what a win can do. It just calms everything down, puts a bit of perspective on it. I still maintain that if we're winning on a Saturday, we're playing well, getting 3 points. Everything else around the club, the chatter about it just dies down a bit, and things aren't as important as they become when we aren't playing well and aren't winning. So I think, a couple of wins, it'll just keep that. And I hope to God he does, because as we said the other day, I'm very much backing him because of the amount of stick he's got so far. And we've got another question about the level of abuse and insults towards Beale, whether that's gone too far. It's gone way too far. It's been absolutely pathetic in a lot of cases. And I think we, as a club, the reaction to Beale hasn't reflected well on us. And you'll see other players, you'll see players looking at social media, go, oh, Sunderland are interested in this window, let's have a look on social media. You'd run a mile. If you saw some of that, you'd run a mile, wouldn't you? Because it's just been crazy, and it's been completely disproportionate to reality. And I genuinely can't fathom it. But I think hopefully a few wins will get everything settled down. And like we saw on Saturday, we saw some improvements. We saw Beale's influence on the team, the change in structure, the way we played, slight change in the directness of how we're playing and all that sort of stuff. And we saw the outcome. So, it wasn't the perfect performance, as we said the other day. No. Stoke had scored in the first half when they could have. It could have been a whole different game. But look, let's go into the Borough and Plymouth games. And if we, I think if we get 4 points out of those two games, everything will just be a bit more calm, and hopefully people will give them time to see what you can do. Now, the reality is managers don't last long. Certainly at Sunderland. If you get a year, you're doing pretty well, aren't you? So, the chances are this time next year, we might not be here regardless.
Yeah, well, Josh Gibson asked us that on Twitter. He said, do you think Beale will still be here come the start of next season? I mean, he'd be doing something not many managers have done if he was still here.
Start next season.
Start next season. I mean, I don't know. Just to kind of my overall view on all of this. I mean, Jill, you mentioned Jill's question. We've had We've had a question from Jill Sarah 1065, who said, do you think the level of personal abuse and insults towards Beale have gone too far? And I gave my views on this on a couple of the recent podcasts. I think it's ridiculous. But you used the word disproportionate, and I think that's accurate, because at the game on Saturday, there was the atmosphere was good. Went into the ground, generally really supportive of the team. I mean, going 3-0 up helped. Obviously, it could have been entirely different had we lost the game, and I think it would have been. I think it would have been pretty violent there, but that's really a reflection on all Beale has to do, is just deliver results. And really, when you take the bluster out of it and you take all of the fluff and all the rest of it away, that's all any manager has to do, really. if they want to be a success anywhere, you have to win games of football. And I think you said it the other week, Martin, on a pod we did, that any manager who goes on a run of losing 4 or 5, they're going to be looking over their shoulder. They're going to lose their job. You look at Darren Moore at Huddersfield, who look at the sort of the carry on that happened there when he left Chef Wed after getting them promoted, and then Huddersfield sacking a successful manager in Warnock because they wanted to make a long-term appointment, bringing Darren Moore, and he's been a complete failure there, and they've lost a few games and he's out of a job. It shows you how quick these things change. But it goes the other way as well. It goes the other way where you can have such a hatred, which it seemed there was towards Beale from a lot of people, that can just sort of flip if he goes on a run and gets us winning games and pointing in the right direction. People will reluctantly, in some cases, acknowledge that he's doing a good job, and they'll support him. And that's all he's got to do. Is he's got to keep winning games. It is really that simple, isn't it, Chris?
Well, that's it. But the thing is, he still had all this hatred, and it's not like, we're talking about, yes, managers get under pressure when they lose 3, 4, 5 games in a row, but he didn't do that. Like I said earlier,
he came with it.
Yeah, like I said, that the form of the club has been similar to what it was before he came in, and it hasn't been any worse. But my issue is with the people who had decided before a ball was kicked under Beale that it wasn't going to work. That's the issue I've got with people. I mean, all right, at some point they might be right, but you can't say that before a ball is kicked and just go, this will not work. Make a statement just to say, I've decided that it's not going to work, because then you'll never be behind him, because even when he's winning games, because you've decided it won't work, at some point you'll be waiting for that point where you just say, I told you. It's just, I just don't get it. I mean, have a viewpoint on how things are going, not just, you can't just decide before he's actually done anything, which some people did, which again, it's another thing I can't really understand. But yeah, so I didn't understand the reaction then, and I don't really understand the reaction now.
Yeah, that was the end of the questions on Michael Beale. Not too many of them, which, like I said, just surprises and kind of makes us laugh, given just the way the last week's been. I guarantee we'd done this a week ago, I would have had 4 pages of things about Michael Beale to talk about. We'll move on to players. We've had a few questions on the players. We've had the one here we'll start off with, and I'll come to you, Martin. Jay at JLikeTheLetter on Twitter has said, why do you think we've had so many problems finding and then keeping fit players in the fullback positions? Now, this is topical, obviously, because we're about to sign, as we record this, we're about to sign a fullback / centre half from Leeds, who previously played for Rotherham and Celtic. Is it Hjelde? I'm famously bad at names, especially.
His dad played for Forest.
Yes, he did. You're right. The carry on I had saying Shisha's name on deadline day last year. I'm still not over that.
He used to be crap on Championship Manager.
He did.
He was what? Sorry, crap.
He was crap on the old Championship Manager. 2001, 2002. He was crap. Defender, right centre, I think he was.
I had that game, but I can't remember him. But yeah, Jay's question, Martin, about why we think we've had problems finding and then keeping fit fullbacks. I guess it's the question Sunderland will be wondering too, because we've got 3 on the shelf at the minute who are all good players in Alessi and Serkin and Huggins, but none of them have really been too available for us this season, particularly in the case of Serkin and Alessi. I mean, for me, I've said it so many times, Serkin, when he's fit, I don't think there's a better left back in the division. And then you've got Alessi, add him into it, long term could end up being a really good Premier League player, but they're just not available to us. And the signing of this other lad kind of feels like the club reluctantly giving in and saying, right, we kind of lost a little bit of patience here. We need a player to be available instead of continually playing the likes of Hume out of position. It feels like we've kind of just gave up in that sense, at least for the rest of the season, and that we're looking for alternatives now. And it's a bit of a shame, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think we've had problems finding them. Like, if you write down our fullbacks on both sides, we've actually got a pretty decent lineup of fullbacks when people are fit. It's them being fit and available that's been problematic, hasn't it? And yeah, like I don't know whether it's something behind the scenes in how we're looking after the players, or it's whether we've actually got those players because they have injury concerns, and that's why Tottenham and West Ham have let Elise and Serkin go, because they know that they're susceptible to picking up injuries and they can't rely on them full time. And that's then a decision that we have to make. Say, well, is it worth the risk getting 30 games a season out of them rather than 46? But yeah, look, who knows in terms of the fitness and how we're looking after them in the background. But, you just hope that Cirkin and Elise can get that fitness and maintain that sort of freedom for injuries, because like they would be pivotal players for us. And like the interesting one, I think, is Elise at centre back, because he kind of came as a centre back, didn't he? And he's been playing full back out of necessity almost because of Cirkin's injuries. And he's got the pace and the height and the physique to do really well there. And it's whether we actually see his long-term future as a centre back, which I think is a kind of interesting proposition. But we've never actually seen him play much there, have we? But I don't think there's any straightforward answer to that. I think we've been a little bit unlucky. No. Like Huggins' injury was a freak one, wasn't it? That wasn't a reoccurrence of anything. And it was such a shame because he was in such good form, can play either side. Hume's proved to be pretty durable. He's played most of the season. Pembele came with an injury, but he's been fit since he recovered from that one. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they put this new lad straight in. Or I would love to see Pembele given a run out at right back, because I think he'll give us that width that we've maybe lacked a little bit. But Jensen Silt's been playing at full back out of choice at present, hasn't he? So yeah, look, who knows? But I don't think we've had problems finding fullbacks, but yeah, keeping them fit has been a challenge.
Another question on fullbacks for you, Chris, from Kyle Richardson on Twitter. He said, with our left-footed fullbacks injured, are you surprised Ellis Taylor hasn't been given a chance? Do you think he's just not up to it? That is an interesting one, because he's been kept around and he does play left wing back, stroke left back, sometimes right back for the under-21s. And actually, to be fair, whenever I've watched him, he's played pretty well, but he doesn't seem to even be in the conversation. I mean, there we go again. We're signing another player who can play left back, stroke centre defence. So what do you think the crack is with him?
Well, I was trying to think, isn't Taylor a little bit kind of older considering what you would think about a young player? Isn't he kind of 21, 22 now? A bit older.
Yeah, he's basically a pensioner. He's I think he's 21.
Yeah. But
actually, I tell a lie. He's 21 in April.
Oh,
so
right,
he's 20 still. So he's still a babby.
Right, he's a bit younger than I thought then. But you're right. Yeah, he seems to have been around for ages, and you do get the impression that if we've had a bit mini fullback injury crisis, and like you said, he hasn't been in the conversation. I'd be surprised if we were kind of looking at him as a long-term option, because if we were, he would have had minutes on the pitch, and he hasn't. But yeah, I mean, I'm with Martin. I mean, the Huggins one was a big one, actually. Everyone was really rooting for him to get back, and it was a bit of a blow for everyone, I think, because everyone really wanted him to do well, and he was on that run. Cirkin is one of the best fullbacks in the division when he plays. You just want him to be fit, and Elise has had his injury problems as well. But with it seems like there's desperation to play Silt. Like we know that he's a really good player, and we've been desperate to just get him in there. And as soon as we had this injury crisis, it was like, right, you're going in a fullback. He doesn't. I mean, he looks really comfortable on the ball, but he's not a fullback. He's a ball playing centre half, and I think he's going to be a cracking one. But we just want him to get minutes on the pitch, and I think actually that desperation has come above what Martin said, because I'd like to see more Pembele as well. But I think our desperation to play Silt and give him minutes on the pitch has come even above that, because there is the case. I think 09's kind of character and like how he lifts other players is keeping them in the team at the minute in centre half, and the fact that there's maybe not that kind of natural option to put out at right back, because I think if 09 didn't have the character he's got, I think we could have possibly seen more of Ballard and Silt in central defence. But yeah, it's, like I said earlier on, it's interesting that we've gone out and bought a permanent one, because to me, that hints at our confidence in the injured players coming back kind of as we want them to come back. We might have just lost a little bit of patience with the likes of Huggins behind the scenes. So it'll be interesting to see how they do come back from these long-term injuries.
Yeah, or if they ever really break back in, the rate at which some of the players are developing. It's like with Huggins, he's going to be out a very long time. And speaking of players who've been out a very long time, Dan Verwaj, hopefully I've got your name right there, Dan, on Instagram, has said, will Corey Evans ever come back? I'll come to you on that one, Chris. Corey Evans, do you think we'll see him in the Sunderland shirt again?
Nope.
It might be a simple yes or no question there.
Nope.
Yeah.
I don't think we'll see him in a Sunderland shirt again. I think he's done.
No, it's a shame, like, isn't it, Martin? Because Corey's been a good player for us, and I actually thought he was playing his best football right before he got injured. You know, even there was times in League One where I didn't quite get it with Evans, and I thought he slowed us down a bit too much. But then when we made the step up into the Championship, he did have an impact, and it was gutting to see him get the injury he got. But I think I've said this before. It kind of felt like a token offer to him just to give him an extra year on his contract to help him out. If he gets back fit before the end of the season, we might see him. But I think his presence has probably been more felt around the training ground. Like a lot of the captain jobs that he will have to carry out, he's probably still been doing. You know, the off the pitch stuff, still doing those sort of things while 09 takes up the mantle on the pitch. But it would be a shock to see him back, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I don't think he'll come back to any great extent for us, and yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see him leave in the summer. I think the contract offer, I think he would have got it regardless of whether he was injured or not. But the fact that we gave him it when he was injured and going to be out for the vast majority of this season, I think it was just a good approach to looking after people and looking after your players. And I think that kind of reflects in a good light.
So.
Well, that's right, and I think again, word gets around football, doesn't it? And if we've got this reputation of being a club that looks after you when you're injured and all that sort of stuff, that can only be good. I think Evans was important for Mowbray. I think we touched upon it the other day. When Mowbray came in, he obviously knew Corey Evans. He had somebody in the dressing room who he could trust. So I think that was a big thing and probably a big influence in Evans staying. And, funnily enough, Evans is this type of player I was talking about earlier in terms of that defensive midfield player who can sit there and allow the other players to go forward. So we kind of need somebody of his ilk and style, I think. But yeah, I doubt, if we do see Corey Evans on the field, I don't think we'll see too much of him before he most likely departs.
I think you're probably right. Unfortunately for him, and unfortunately for us, I think we could have done with him at times. A fully fit Corey Evans at times this season would have made an impact. We'll move on a little bit. We've had a lot of questions around owners and models and all the rest of it. So we'll try and plough through those because that seems to be what most people want to hear us talk about. Right off the bat, and this is a biggie, Chris, from Daniel.uk09 on Instagram. He said, what are your opinions of the Sunderland owners? He says owners there, so yeah. We're talking Kyril Louis-Dreyfus and Juan Sartori. What are your opinions of them?
I don't know. What, as people? Or
well, as owners, I guess. What's your opinion of them as owners?
Well, look, they've been here, I think, what is it, just gone 3 years now?
Sartori a lot longer, yeah.
But, well, pops into the odd board meeting and stuff like that and hopes that we'll get it at the Premier League and it's worth a lot more, basically. That's Sartori's kind of role in everything. But God, I mean, look, 3 years, look where we were then. I'm sure we'll look back, not that long ago, but me and you were talking about it. The team that we put out on that first game after they came in and took over the club. I mean, look at where we are now. I mean, it's up and talking about the players and talking about on the brink of the playoffs. We're in the playoffs in the Championship last season. I mean, it's just been night and day on the pitch. Bringing Speakman in, bringing in a way of doing things and sticking to it. I mean, I like the way we're doing things. It's a breath of fresh air. And I think a lot of other clubs are looking at us a little bit envious of that, the fact that we've got a bit of a structure. And, you see some teams buying players and left, right and centre and you think, I'd rather not. Thank you very much. I'd rather keep doing what we're doing. So, I mean, on that front, brilliant. Off the pitch, I just get the feeling that they've parked a lot and they've just went, they've kind of thought we'll deal with all of the off the pitch stuff later, which is really disappointing. And I think it's now taken these recent events to give them a real kick up the arse and to realise that where they're actually at off the pitch. And it seems like now the penny's dropped, but it shouldn't have taken this long and it shouldn't have taken so much shouting at them for so long. And that's a real kind of disappointment. But in terms of my opinion of them, I think his heart's in the right place. I think he wants to do things properly, which is refreshing. So I've got a lot of time for the owners. I think they've done a lot of good. They just, like I said, it's that off the pitch where they really need to improve things and get it right. But kind of on the pitch, I don't think you can really knock them.
Yeah, I think that's an understatement. They've got to get things right off the pitch. I think there's so much that does need to be improved, Martin. And John Wilson's, again, asked us a question. He said, if KLD is genuinely going to show the fans that the club has learned lessons in the coming months, what will those actions look like? I mean, the big step was meeting with the fan groups, obviously, because I think it'd been nearly a year since the last meeting between anybody from the club and the fan groups. And even in those early days with Kyril, he wasn't present at the meetings. It would always be Speakman, Davison, Chris Waters, Oscar Chamberlain. Kyril made himself seen at this one, which is a big step. And going off the minutes from the meeting, there wasn't groundbreaking stuff in there, but there were a lot of action points and there were a lot of things for them to take forward. And you much got the impression from particularly the Red and White Army, and they were backed up from the other groups, that they weren't going to be so kind in future if some of these things weren't particularly actioned. So there is that at least, but we do have to start seeing evidence, and that's something I think John's trying to point out there. You know, what does actual progress look like when it comes to the off the pitch stuff?
Well, it's running the club off the field like a championship club that wants to get in the Premier League rather than a non-league club. And I think, you know, I agree with Chris in his evaluation of what we've kind of seen from the owners on the field. And, you know, I'm completely on board with the ownership and everything that we're seeing from a footballing perspective. But, like, we've seen little to no improvement on things off the field. You know, there's still problems with the ticket office, you know, with the meeting minutes that I read through from the meeting the other day with the supporters collective. The people had called other clubs' ticket offices and got straight through to 50 or 49 out of 50 of them,
30,
and the one
I think
exception was Sunderland. Yeah, you couldn't get through to Sunderland, but you get through every other club.
It was an old friend of Roker Report there, Malcolm Bramley, who came. Yeah. I thought it was great, by the way.
Brilliant. Superb.
There's no comeback from that, is there? You know, that's one way to prove your point.
But, you know, there's that sort of stuff. There's obviously the stuff with the kits, which, you know, was covered in the meeting, that they've got a different kit supply for next season and ordered more kits and all that sort of stuff. But, you know, these problems should have been sorted out a long time ago. You know, they've been evident for so long. The stadium could do with a bit of a refresh and a lick of paint and some maintenance there, I think. So there's that stuff to it. And, you know, you can give them a bit leeway in the early days, because, you know, the footballing side of things had to be sorted out, and without us being in the championship, all of the other stuff was pretty irrelevant. You know, there's a little point in having the best ticket office and club shop in the world if we were at the bottom of League One. So in terms of where they put the priorities and the emphasis on action, that's correct. But I think now they've got to look after that off-field stuff too. And, you know, in terms of what KLD has to show, he's, you know, learnt lessons over the coming months. It is action on those sort of things. And, you know, within the supporters collective, I think they agreed that there would be action points, as you said, taken out of each meeting, you know, meeting more regularly, start the meeting with those action points and see what actually has been done. So the club have been held accountable to it. But, you know, if you're kind of looking at the ownership overall, and you go back over the ownership that we've had, you know, whether you go back to the Donald and Methven era, you go back to Ellis Shaw, to Quinney's consortium, to Bob Murray, to Tom Cowie. There's always been things that haven't been quite right. We've never, ever had the perfect owner. We've never had it where, and I don't think any club has, clubs are always going to have some criticism of things that they should have done or shouldn't have done or what have you. I think there's elements of people who look at negativity with the ownership and pounce on it, and for whatever reason will emphasize and focus on that rather than positives. But I think if you take a step back, and as Chris said, other clubs, if you're a fan of another club, looking at how we've progressed under this ownership, you know, with Speakman heading up the football side of things, with Kyril Louis-Dreyfus overall, with Sartori, I think, you know, there's lots of other supporters of other clubs will go, I'd take that. And I think it feels if we're kind of secure, stable, and progressing, which, as a football supporter, that's kind of what you want from your ownership. You don't want them to be. I would be really concerned if this transfer window we splashed out 80 million quid's worth of transfer fees, So I'd be concerned that we're chasing something too quickly. Like I wouldn't want to see it. So like I'm with Chris on that one. I think it's they're doing a good job on the football side certainly, but yeah, off field there's some things to sort out.
Yeah, Dan Edgestroop Anderson on Facebook has asked a quite a broad question about what we think about the long-term trajectory of the club and the bigger picture. And we might have covered off some of that just there with sort of thoughts on how the owners have done, particularly on the football side of things. But the long-term trajectory of the club, Chris, under this owner, I mean, you can see what the aim is, can't you? We know it's to get to the Premier League, but it's not just to get to the Premier League. It's to, when we get there, be in a position to stay there and also progress once we do get there, because that's what a lot of clubs struggle with. They throw everything at getting into the Premier League, and then once they're there, it becomes a bit of a panic and they struggle to stay there. And you might disagree with me on this, but I think what we're seeing is them trying to build a team in that image, in that once we do get to the Premier League, we don't just fall straight back out of it and have to start again.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're talking about chasing it. You just need to look at clubs like Reading at the minute and what can happen if you really chase it and you end up in a right mess. We were almost in that position once upon a time. We could have easily been a Reading. What's happening to them at the minute, and the way we're doing it, we're not kind of throwing money at it, which again, I really like that we're being sustainable, and we're buying these players who can progress with us. And I think talking about the long-term trajectory, that we're getting to that point where it almost feels at the minute, sitting in 7th this season, with all of the, talking about managers getting sacked and stuff like that, we're sitting 7th in the Championship. And sometimes I can't marry the two together. I don't know, that it's almost like we've accidentally getting on the verge of the playoffs. Like, people think we're a club in chaos at times, but we're on the verge of the playoffs, where I think that's our place in the world at the minute with the squad we've got. And I think it's progressing to that, to get to that point, and it's the problem is, because you're developing players, the way you do things like this, you can't have a revolution in one window or two windows where you completely revamp the squad. It doesn't work like that. You change one or two things every window, or you really kind of focus on one position. But the
game has definitely moved on since the last time we did that under Roy Keane, hasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And it's going to take time to get to that point where they need to be, where we eventually build the squad that wipes the floor with the Championship, that they can then hang their hat on and say, we've now built a squad that we can say is too good for the Championship. We just go up and we romp it and we get promoted comfortably. Because then when you go up, you've got those players who could make that step up comfortably, and then you're in a position to recruit again and strengthen from a decent position. Not a position, if you look at the bottom three of the Premier League, where your Burnleys and your Sheffield Uniteds and your Lutons went up with clearly squads that weren't good enough, and they are where they are, and that they're going to have a couple of cycles of bouncing up and down. So look, the long-term trajectory, I think, is it's going to take a lot more windows to get to that point. My biggest worry, and I know there's going to be loads of people who disagree with this, and I don't quite know, again, a little bit like the Mike Beale, I don't get some of the stick that Speakman gets, considering the job he's done in 3 years, like something like 5 or 6 transfer windows, revamped the squad to what it is now. Yes, okay, there's been mistakes on the way, but, transfers are a bit of a dark art, aren't they, where there's that many variables, anything could go wrong. I mean, God, someone might just not be able to settle in the area or something like that. They didn't like the fish and chips down the seafront or something like that. You just don't know what might happen. So actually, if I was in charge of someone like Everton, Palace, I don't know, someone in that position, Wolves, I'd be looking at Sunderland and I'd throw money at Speakman and say, there's a job here, I'll double your wages, bring all of your recruitment team here, and we want you to be the recruitment team for us. And that's my biggest fear, because then that's what it's built on, and we've had success with it for 3 years. How do you build that again? If you rip that part out, that's the part that's been the driver. My concern is that kind of the success we've got and the reputation we're getting, then there's going to be clubs circling around Speakman and his team.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the question was around trajectory. And one club which is often cited when talking about models and the right way to do it is Brentford. They're a good example of a team who got promoted, and then when they got promoted were able to stop there. Their journey wasn't without bumps in the road. I mean, they got promoted out of League One, immediately made it to the playoffs just like we did, and then got beaten in the semi-finals just like we did. The following year they got to the playoff final and got beat. I think it was against Fulham. And then the year after they got to the playoffs again, and this time they won the playoffs and got to the Premier League. And then when they eventually got to the Premier League, they've managed to stay there for a few years, and and they've done it the right way. They've signed players that were maybe undervalued, developed them, sold them on, managed to keep continually improving. Ivan Toney, who they've got now, was going to end up making them a lot of money, and he was a punt from League One. Like but people forget about how Brentford got there. They didn't just win the league all of a sudden. They actually went through a bit of adversity and struggled a little bit, and then when they eventually got into the Championship, they had a few knockbacks where they got beaten in the playoffs, and that might be a similar journey to the one we're on. So an upwards trajectory isn't always completely upwards. Sometimes there's a little bump, and occasionally you have to change direction to get back on course. So I think overall, the bigger picture on the footballing side, like if we don't get promoted this year, we're going to lose Jack Clark. I've got no doubt about that. He's simply too good at this stage now for teams not to come around with big money. We're already seeing it. If Lazio are after him, you can guarantee there are a lot more clubs after him as well. And in the summer, when they've all got a bit more money to spend, when there's a bit more to do, I think that we're going to struggle to keep him. But the point is that eventually when we do sell him, we reinvest that money and move on. So, yeah, fingers crossed this is the way we keep heading. We've had a lot of questions actually around the model itself, and I'd love to answer them all, but they're all generally around about the same thing. People asking us about the model, the general state of the model, whether we think it's a good idea or not. I think the sort of general consensus you can tell from what we've said is we all kind of like the way we do things, and it's not perfect, but I think they've got more right than they've got wrong, and that's the important thing, really. They're not going to get everything right, as I think you said before, Martin. No owner's perfect. If there were, it would be very easy to get to the top. So fingers crossed to keep continuing the way we're going. We'll move on a little bit towards the end of the pod. We've got a few more questions to go through. I'll throw at you on this one, Chris. Season so far, Anthony Richardson at SAFC on Twitter has said the performance against Ipswich skewed our expectations for this season. On balance, I see us as a 69-point squad, still working on the striker situation, but generally improving and future-proof in other areas. We're one signing away from success, but one injury away from crisis.
Has the performance against Ipswich skewed our expectations this season? No, I don't think so. I think it was a good performance, but I think we've had better this season. Talking about expectation, I think where we are is about where we expected us to be. I mean, I think this is a tougher league, so your top four is pretty much done. And then I said for quite a few weeks, there's then half the division fighting it out for 2 playoff places. So, I mean, in terms of expectations, I think we're exactly where we expected us to be. But we, as I mentioned earlier, we are where we are without really playing that well this season. Like it's almost like we're 7th in the Championship without really trying, which is a bizarre place to be. I mean, that we haven't. Martin mentioned earlier on, there's places in the team where you just think it still doesn't work this season, and we haven't worked out the solutions to those problems. But we're 7th, and we're kind of and I think everyone fancied the likes of Borough this season, and there was some other clubs down there as well. Blackburn were expected to do better. Millwall were expected to do better. There's all those kind of clubs below us fighting it out to try and get ahead of us, and we're talking about us having problems. So I think we're exactly where there or thereabouts. Last season, we've already talked about the Amad effect last season, so that lifted us a bit more. We've signed 4 strikers this season, hasn't come off, and we've had that to deal with. But we're 7th. And I just think in terms of expectations, I think that's looking at the table as well and looking at the issues we had. I think we're doing pretty well. And I think we're in a really good position considering everything that's happened and everything that's going on.
Ollie Williamson, Martin, on Instagram has asked us honest prediction for where we finish. This is the $1 million question, isn't it?
Well, yeah, the top 4 positions are done, aren't they? You've got 3 relegated clubs in Ipswich. They'll have those sewn up. And I think you've got 10, 12, 13 clubs chasing after those last 2 playoff places.
Yeah.
And like, reality is we could finish 5th or we could finish 10th, really. And any team who goes on a good run of form between now and the end of the season will claim those last 2 places. Prediction? I don't know. I actually don't think we'll make the playoffs. I would say 7th where we are, but
I'm saying 6th. I still think we'll get in. I think we'll manage to sneak in. It's the Sunderland chaos theory that I came up with a few years ago. We always manage to just go completely mad at some point, and I think it'll be another late run for that final place for me. What about you, Chris?
I think Martin's right. I don't think we're consistent enough. I think West Brom are going to be. I think West Brom are going to be that. They're going to lock in that 5th place. I think they're a good side. The run Coventry are on, I'd be surprised if they let up too much with the run they're on, and nobody else underneath them's consistent enough. So I've kind of expect the top 6 to be as it is now, and I think we'll miss out.
Here's a caveat for you though. I actually reckon we might end up doing better points wise than we did last season.
So end up finishing on more than, what was it, 69 points last year?
Yeah, and I think it was pretty much the lowest points total I got in the championship for the past championship playoffs. Sorry, for the past 10 seasons. So that's an interesting one in terms of perception. So if we end the season with 72 points, for example, but finish 7th, have we progressed?
I think some people would say no, but I would argue yes, because we've somehow managed to come out better in the end. But TNLA_3 on Twitter has asked Chris, are Sunderland ready for the Premier League?
No. No. I think that's pretty obvious where we are on the table, because like I said, you look at last season and we played the likes of Burnley and Sheffield United, and we at times they looked a level above us, and they're kind of struggling this season in the Premier League. And this season, you just need to look at how inconsistent we are in the Championship, and we're not ready for the Premier League. Like I said earlier on, I think the long-term plan is to build that team where they can hang their hat on them and say we're too good for the Championship. And I think that's still a good few windows off at least, yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think, and that's probably not going to make people happy, but I think we'll be in a better position next year. Once I actually think we've already had one fairly big sale with Ross Stewart going, but I do think that this squad probably needs a big sale, and then the investment into probably 3 or 4 even better quality of player. Like at the minute we're shopping in sort of £2-3 million is about where we're hitting when it comes to signing players, and I think people aren't going to like to hear this, but Jack Clark will be gone in the summer, I think, if we don't get promoted, and I don't think we will, which then means there's going to be a big chunk of money there to reinvest into the squad, and I just think that's the general path that teams take at this stage when they're sort of building like we are. They'll make a big sale, and then they'll invest that money into a slightly better quality of player. We can pay a little bit more in wages, and we'll have maybe 3 or 4 better players to add to that squad, plus the development of all the players we've already got, who by that point we're going to have between, 50 and 100, in some cases 150 games under the belt in the Sunderland shirt. I just think we'll be in a better position next year, Martin. I don't know what you think, but I'm more confident of us being ready in a year than I am now.
Oh, look, I think you look at how Leicester and Leeds and Southampton have done this season in the Championship to see the gulf between the bottom of the Premier League and the top of the Championship. And I think we're miles off it at the minute. And I think, what you've raised there kind of goes back to the questions about the model. And, there's some questions that we haven't been able to get to. But in terms of like bringing those players in, reinvesting the money, that's what we've not seen yet. And that's the next step of the model. We've got the money from the sale of Lahadji in the summer, Ross Stewart. Somebody else goes, probably Jack Clark, as you say. Chances are he'll go in the summer. Hopefully it's the summer and not in the next few days. But it's how we reinvest that money, and we've been bringing in players who, you look at Barr, he's been here for 18 months, and it's only now he's looking as if he can contribute regularly. So the players that we've been bringing in have needed time to settle. And, people will have a view on that. and some people might not agree. And you want players to come in immediately and be in the first team. We do need some of that, but just because players like Bar, Aushish, Bennett, whoever else haven't come in and made a huge impact yet, that doesn't mean to say that they're not going to in the coming months and in the coming years. And it's a longer term thing. We're making signs for the longer term. We do need some experience in that team now, and that we've got to supplement the youngsters with a couple of players of experience. I think that's how we'll get a Premier League ready side next season, because what you want is to go up and, like you talked about, Brentford and Brighton's another one where you get promoted and you keep the core of that side. You don't want to make wholesale changes like Forest had to do last season to create a Premier League side. We want to create a Premier League ready side now, not just go up and then have to create a Premier League ready side. And I think we'll have a stronger group of players this time next year in the Championship than we have now. And I think then the Championship will be weaker next season, I suspect, than it is this season. So it'll be interesting to see how we're looking next season. But I think if we add a couple of players of experience who can just bolster things a little bit, who come in and ready for the first team, then you're looking far more ready for the Premier League than we currently are.
Yeah, and we'll end off with this question from Michael Paul on Twitter. Come to you first, Chris. Are you looking forward to Series 3 of Sunderland Till I Die? It's the first time we've mentioned it, but are you looking forward to that, Chris?
Actually, it should be brilliant. I mean, a Sunderland documentary where it actually turns out all right. We haven't had that before, so it'll be refreshing in that sense. But it'll be brilliant. See all those scenes again and see how they cover that. So they've got good subject matter this time, so you actually want to watch it. Yeah, looking forward to it.
You mentioned there, you said a Sunderland documentary where the outcome's good. The Two Tribes documentary they ran on BBC, we beat Newcastle 2-1 at the end of that one. So, but yeah, generally speaking, we don't come out too well on these things. What about you, Martin? You looking forward to it?
No, I am. As Chris said, you kind of know the end. It's got a happy ending this time, with the playoff win. And yeah, I just hope there's nothing ridiculous in that comes back to bite us. But yeah, no, I'll certainly tune in as soon as it's launched, and probably binge it in the evening.
Yeah, but it's only going to be 3 episodes, isn't it? So I think it's only going to be 3 episodes anyways, so it should be nice and easy to chow down on. I'm looking forward to it. That weekend was probably the best I've had as a Sunderland fan from my perspective. Just being able to see us win at Wembley with my dad was nice, and my mates and stuff. So yeah, big one for me. I'm looking forward to it, and I wonder if it might help Alex Neil get a job, because he's out of work at the minute, and see how he comes across on it.
Yeah, I just hope there was one of their cameras in Trafalgar Square, mate. They might have caught you.
Oh dear, no, let's hope not. Thanks everybody who sent questions in. I'm sorry we haven't managed to get them all done. I mean, I've put this across every platform we're on, and yeah, we got a massive response. We've covered quite a lot, to be fair. I'm sitting here with my sheet in front of us, and I think we've done about 3/4 of the questions we got, and most of them really we covered off topics that people had asked. So sorry if we didn't get to you on this occasion, but we're going to try and keep up this format of podcast semi-regularly with the questions from you lot, and keeping us on our toes, and maybe pressing us on some of the things we don't get to cover off in detail on the regular pods when we're reviewing or previewing games. So thank you very much. Cheers to Martin and Chris for staying with me at this late hour. Well, late for me and Chris.
Thank you very much.
Nice and early for you, Martin, I think. But
no worries.
Cheers, boys. Cheers to listeners for joining us. We will be back on Thursday on Twitter Spaces with a live deadline day show. So we're going to kind of do this sort of thing as we do every transfer deadline day, but on Twitter Spaces where we're reacting live to everything that's going on. There'll be a bunch of us from Roker Report on that, so make sure you tune in for that. And the idea really is that you can stick us on, mute your TV when you've got Sky Sports News just repeating the same old shit about Man U and Liverpool and whoever else, and trying to make really mundane bits of business sound interesting. And instead you can listen to us chat shite about Sunderland, and hopefully we can react to some incomings and outgoings as we're on the air. So that should be fun. Also, after that, we'll probably do a preview in between sort of deadline day and the Borough game, because we've got to talk about that game coming up. I don't think we've mentioned it tonight. So lots to come over the coming days from us. So make sure you tune into everything, and we'll be live on Thursday night from 8 p.m. on the Roker Report Twitter page. So catch us then. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.